Hello, this is Tom Georgi, and this is the second video in my introduction to my Noonsky viola d'amore. Since the first video, I've managed to get almost all of the strings replaced with gut. We've got only this top D string now remaining as a dominant string, and I've had an opportunity to make a recording with the other instrument that I made. So I've made this viola d'amore, and previously I made a violin, and that violin I gave a nickname to Bernsky, and this is the Noonsky. And so one of the things I want to do in this video is just explain why I did such a silly thing, and that is because my mother, if she were a teenager today, would almost certainly be diagnosed as having autism spectrum disorder and ADHD. And the two people that got her through high school were two of her high school English teachers, Bernice Ford and Mrs. Noon. Mrs. Noon's husband was killed in World War I, and Bernice Ford's parents told her not to marry the boy that she meant to marry, and so these two spinsters, when my mother came along, I think they were vulnerable to someone who needed extra support, and they remained support to my mother throughout her life. It wasn't until I became an adult that it finally dawned on me that it's very unusual for a woman to have only two adult female friends. But that was my mother for you. So I'm going to answer basically one question today, and then I'm going to move to the video that I made of a work where I play my two instruments with one another. So the question today is just like, basically, how did you do it? You obviously were persistent, and so this gives me an opportunity to thank all of the violin makers that I have known over the years for advice at various levels. For example, William Monacle is a big influence on me. From him I learned a great deal of the history of instrument making in a kind of a academic historical way. Another person who was a great influence was Joe Pecknick, who was conservator of the musical instruments at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. I found him very influential in the sense that I hadn't considered the history of music from the point of view of instrument making. I had, like most musicians, I had understood it from the history of music itself and from the history of performance practice. And when I included in that the history of instrument making, actually my satisfaction with my understanding of music history increased greatly. Just to give you some idea, there were many other people who helped enormously, and it's because there are many obscure tasks in making a viola d'amore or any bowed stringed instrument, and it isn't just having the tools, it's also knowing how to use them. For example, last May I was cutting the purfling channels in this instrument, and so I worked at it for a day, and it was going pretty hard. So I went back to the guy who loaned me the chisel to chisel the waste out of the purfling channel, and I said, this is really hard. What's going wrong? And he said, oh, is that how you're using it? You're holding it upside down. That's just an example of the sorts of things that you know, there's always a first time and you have to learn. Another question was it hard to get the pegs in? And actually, it was hard to get the pegs in, and I put a couple of them in the wrong places, and so I've already pointed out to this kind of crescent moon here, but if you could see the instrument much more closely, you would discover that because a couple of these pegs had to be bushed before they were even pegs on the instrument, there's like little half moons at two places on the peg box where the peg hole had to be moved. Okay, so that's enough of that background information. Now I'd like just to introduce the musical work that I'm going to be playing. So there are not many treatises, instruction books for the viola d'amore, and one of them is by a guy named Milandre, published in 1770 in France. And in the back of it, as in many instruction books, there's a number of pieces that you can play, and one of them is the one that I'm going to play for you in just a moment, A L'amour. Of course, in the book it's a solo, but there's this one point in it where it becomes completely clear to me that you know, they're just putting a popular piece in the book for people to play, and that's these 6 beats here, or let's call it 12 beats. In a solo, you wouldn't just sit there on a single note like that unless the name of your solo was Johnny One Note or something like that. So you'll see when I come to that in the performance that I'll play for you in just a moment, and I'll give you the original score. That the lower part, which is taken on the violin, does an imitation. So that was a fun thing to do too. Anyway, I doubt this is the last of the videos in this series, and I've enjoyed your comments on YouTube, and thank you very much for listening.